Hello, I'm Grant, and welcome to Second Plates. On this show, we try to have a bunch of ingredients and recipes that all kind of roll up together or take a lot of ingredients that don't go bad so that there's not a lot of waste. And one of the main things I always like run into an issue is if I go, say, make some food for like work or just I want to make something simple, I'll usually do like simple things like sandwich or whatnot. And I would always be left over because I would buy, say, like a tomato, and I would only use maybe like 2/3 of it for a sandwich, or I would want maybe like one thing of lettuce on that sandwich, but I don't want to go buy a whole thing. Well, today I wanted to go through this idea of making a homemade salad because it sounds so simple, but it really is just this amazing catch-all recipe where you can throw like basically anything into it. And in particular, I have a couple of selections of just like random pieces of bread because we're going to be making our own croutons. It's really simple and it makes it seem so much fancier, and it's a great use for like those one or two like pieces of bread that would otherwise go bad, but you still get a nice kind of a fancy meal out of there. So today we're going to make that, and we're going to go see how it comes out. So whenever I cook anything with a meat, because I usually do, that's my primary ingredient, I always like to start with that. So I'm going to start with this simple little boneless chicken breast I have here. I'm just going to do a simple salt and pepper, and I'm trying not to make this too fancy because the point isn't for this, say, like a really spicy chicken. It's supposed to go with the whole salad. So I'm just going to do really simple salt and pepper. Shake this down. And I like to get it cooking first because really, once this is in, I'm not going to have to worry about it too much, and I can just focus on chopping all my other ingredients. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be cooking this and then dicing it into cubes. And I generally, actually, if I was making this, I wouldn't, say, usually cook it the day of. What I find really great with this, and the reason I wanted to include the chicken, was I would often make this like the day before. Like a lot of the time you'll see you get like 2 or 3 chicken breasts when you buy like a package. And it always works out where if I'm cooking for like myself, then I have an extra, or if I'm cooking for me and another person, I always have this odd one out. And so I'll cook that the day before, and you have one that's cold. And because this is a salad and it's already completely cooked, I don't have to reheat it. It's not a big deal. I can just basically dice it right then and there if I decide I want a salad. It's like one of the first things where I can just, like if I show up and I'm like, oh, I might make something really fancy, but then I see that I have just some chicken and a head of lettuce, like, you know what, I'm just gonna go for a salad. It's like, it seems like it's a more of an involved dish, but it's actually like nice and simple. But we're gonna go ahead and go over some of the ingredients here then while this cooks. So what I have here is I have lettuce, I have spinach, I have an onion, and I have Parmesan cheese as well as dried cranberries. This is going to be a chicken Caesar salad. The goal is to basically make the classic one except with cranberries. It's my personal favorite. You can go pretty much any way you want, and I call this a Caesar salad, but again, the real awesome thing about this is you can throw just like whatever you have. So I'll throw in onions, tomatoes, green onions. I'll do peppers. I actually like a spicy salad sometimes. I think that's probably a little odd, but I don't mind it. But it's just kind of fun. Then we're going to be taking this bread and this hamburger bun to chop them up and make them into their own little croutons. And then that's something that I think is just like a nice little touch. And I wanted to kind of show off that really like, oh, I always end up with extra hamburger buns because I rarely ever cook like 8 burgers at once. So it's like kind of a cool thing that you can reuse it. So I'm going to start with the main lettuce here. This is just some simple lettuce I'd get at the grocery store. I used to buy like, say, a pre-chopped package, or I would get just enough for one sandwich, but I find it so much easier to get this because then you can use as much as you want. And anything extra you have, you just throw it in the salad. So I'm going to start cutting off the lower section. I usually just toss that, and we're just going to go right down, and we're just going to cut like so. And it honestly, it dices pretty easily. Cool. Kind of go ahead and collect this. It's interesting how like small this looks, and once you start chopping, it almost seems to like get bigger. So I'm just going to kind of cut in perpendicular to where I did before to kind of get some nice easy chunks. It's usually just personal preference on how big you like your salad. Like I personally, I like large chunks, but I can tell it does affect the actual, like how easy it is to eat. Go ahead and toss this all in here. Plus, usually I wouldn't normally have this much because I usually like to dial this in where normally I'll buy this, toss it into some sandwiches, toss it into, maybe if I make a smaller salad on the side. It's so flexible. This is romaine, by the way. This is just personal preference, but I do not like iceberg lettuce. I think it's just very watery and cold, and romaine's just so much more interesting to me. But that's something where if it's up to you. Next, we're going to go ahead and chop onion. So I actually have been trying to improve my knife skills. And onions are very particular, not hard, but just particular, where I'm going to slice it basically straight down, like so. I'm going to take about half of it because onions, again, one of the main premises of the show was there's so much of them, right? But I'm only going to use about half of this out, so it's not completely overpowering. Then I'm going to grab the outer layer of this onion. I always throw it away. You don't need to. Like, there's some cases where it's probably fine, but I think it's just good practice to kind of go and peel it off and get the nice, fresh one. Okay. I'm going to slice our tips. And then next, so the goal here is I'm going to be trying to keep the onion as together as possible while cutting it in such a way that at the end I can dice it in one smooth motion. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start coming in from my right and cutting in towards the onion about halfway. Trying to keep one section of the onion, like I don't want it to break. Then I'm going to cut right along here. I'm not going to cut all the way through like this. I'm going to purposely leave this one little nub here so I can hold on to it. And this is something I've just been practicing where once you get good at this, I can imagine you can just dice it so quick. But the goal here is to keep it together, one, so I'm not just crying on the set of the show, and two, to keep it all uniform and quick. Like it's easy to see with like say the lettuce, once it starts getting cut into and just falls over into this big pile, it's hard to work around it. But with this, as long as you keep the structure, I can just squeeze it like this, and it's not that bad at all. I like to make the sideways cut first, personally just because it helps keep the structure better. And then once we have that, we can just, I hold it like right here, and you can just start cutting it. It's nice little chunks. And then just finish up this however you want. It's actually something where I really like the idea of knife skills because it seems like something that's just so extreme and, I don't know, kind of like hoity-toity when you first hear about it. But the more I've done it, it really is just like, you know what, that really is just like a really good way to cut an onion. You end up with like nice, even chunks that's consistent. You don't say end up with a quarter-sized chunk and another one that's just a shred. It's just nice, consistent, and as you get better and better, it just becomes faster and faster because you do it with so many different foods. So I'm going to take this over here. Obviously, spinach, you're free to chop it up if you want. I leave it as is. It's one of the reasons why it's so convenient because I'll just have it, could throw it on a sandwich, throw it in a salad. It's something where it's like it's probably one of my main filler vegetables because you can just put it in anything and it just kind of cooks down and is simple and adds mass. Next thing I'm going to actually cook or cut up is this bread. What I have here is I have just 2 pieces of sandwich bread and a hamburger bun. This can ideally be done if you had like a leftover baguette or something that's like has that hard eggshell layer to it. Those work well, but really you can use anything. So I'm going to chop these up into cubes, like so. Doesn't really matter too much on what this looks like because they're just croutons. They don't need to be super uniform, just as long as it's not anything too big. Like I said, you can use any one. This is actually a whole wheat bread, but I would love to try it with, say, like a sourdough. You could even do something really interesting like a rye crouton. I don't know if that would be good or not, but I'm sure there's some salad out there that it's just perfect for. I'm actually going to use this plate here. So, croutons are essentially just pepper, olive oil, sometimes thyme, and we basically just throw that all in together, toss it, and it comes out better than you'd expect for such a simple little dish. And for me, I like croutons because I like having some kind of crispness to the salad. I'm just going to drizzle this here. kind of just mix these around a little bit. I want to just basically coat them in olive oil as much as you can, just on the outer layer so they kind of crisp up. I like really crispy croutons. It's the same reason I would like, say, breadcrumbs on a salad. Just like the crunchiness is like important. I'm going to add garlic powder. I think this is like just my personal preference. I like garlic on a lot of stuff, so I feel like this is a good way to add some garlic flavor to a salad without necessarily having garlic itself. Because like in most dishes, you can cook the garlic into it, but I feel like with a salad, you'll get like one big chunk of just garlic because it's not like mixed and cooked into anything. And add our thyme. You're gonna like this because like it seems always fancy. Like croutons, I don't know why they seem fancy, but because they really aren't. It's literally just old bread that you kind of cook together. But it does add, I think, a certain element of like being homemade to a dish where it's like, hey, it's something where like, you know, I actually made this myself. It implies a certain level of thinking ahead and just like care versus, I don't know, like without them, it just feels like, oh, for all you know, I could have just gotten a pre-made salad out of a bag and then serve that. So for this, all I'm doing is I'm going to put these into the oven for about 10 minutes and they'll kind of crisp up. I just usually keep an eye on it depending on what kind of bread I have. It's really easy to tell when they're done. You can totally just grab one out and sample it and we're good. For reference, what I have here is it's just a baking mat. It's kind of like a reusable parchment paper that can stay in an oven. They are not necessary, but I really like them because I just think of all the times I had something stuck on a pan that was a pain to clean, or, oh man, how can I get this thing off? And with this, you just whip it out, throw it in the dishwasher. So much easier than scraping my oven out. Okay, while that cooks, I'm gonna check on the chicken. There. I feel like chicken's just like such an easy thing to cook around because again with this, like I find myself almost avoiding it for a show like this because it's so easy. I can just freeze it and then be like, oh, you know what, I want chicken tonight, so I'll just like grab it and thaw it out in my refrigerator just before I go to work and then come back, toss it in. You don't need a lot of forethought, but you can have like nice dishes and it can be your primary ingredient. So I'm just gonna add some onion, toss that in. Probably some more here. Just gonna go ahead and basically scoop this up. I don't think there's any good way to really mix a salad. It's a very awkward thing to have to do. I don't know how to describe it other than that, where it just kind of like chunks around and falls out, but as long as you get a general mixing, it's fine. While I wait, I'm going to put on some just Parmesan. And this is my, again, personal take. I like dried cranberries. It's not a staple of a Caesar salad, but again, like these last a while. You can just buy them in bulk, so it's really easy to be like, oh, you know what, I'm going to grab some, because I know eventually I'm going to cook a salad. Or just, honestly, I'll have them as a side dish just because I like them. It's a good excuse to buy them. Like a lot of the way I prep a lot of these dishes is just things that all kind of go together and I can either use as a main or a side, and it just lets me have so much more flexibility in my own week to be like, you know what, I can have this dish and this dish and this dish and have a fairly nice varied diet without it being a ton of planning. Gonna check on the chicken. The way I always learned to cook meat was always based around like temperatures. That's something I'm pretty big on, so I'm going looking for 165. Looks like it's about there. Looking good. We can go ahead and pull that off. And all I'm gonna do now with this is, ideally if this was, say I was cooking it for myself, or if I was honestly cooking it for someone else, I would actually refrigerate this. It's not required, but this is just my take, but it's a little odd sometimes to have a really hot piece of chicken on your cold salad. So that's why I would purposely cool it down. So what I'm going to ideally do here is I basically use the same action as when I cut the onion. I'm going to dice this, where I'm going to attempt to cut one way horizontally on each, and then about 3/4, and then just chop it in. So I think, and like right there, that kind of speaks for how useful knife skills are, where you can universally use them on so many things. Like, I wouldn't think that the skills to chop an onion and a piece of chicken would be as consistent, but it totally is, and it's really improved my own process. This smells really nice, though. I can just tell you, like, it's awesome. Trying not to squeeze this too much. There is like a certain level of wanting to rest your meats after you cook them, particularly if you make steak. It's not as important in chicken, but I believe the idea is that when you cook the meat, it basically tries to push the liquid in towards the center because it's trying to get away from the heat. So what you'll do sometimes, if you're like really juicy stuff like a steak, is you'll purposely let it sit so it can redistribute. Otherwise, you can end up with a little bit with like this, where you kind of squeeze out all the juice that you want inside the meat. It's not a big deal for chicken because we're going to be cutting this up anyway, but for steak, it's a pretty big deal because you want that to stay in there. It's a big part of the flavor. Cool. Going to go ahead and pull this in then to the salad. Compared to making a lot of, I guess, like hot dishes, one thing that's really nice about a salad is if you have like anything come up that's a little bit like unnerving, like, oh man, I forgot to do whatever, you can totally just take a break and like, you know what, oh shoot, I forgot to go get, I don't know, my cranberries. Well, your salad's not going to burn if you step away from it like, say, a burger might. You can kind of just work on it as is. So I'm going to go ahead and chop up the rest of this chicken into strips. The benefit, I suppose, of chilling it is it's so much easier to cut because you can actually hold it. But that's fine. At this point, like honestly, it doesn't really matter if you do cubes or, now that I actually see this here and it's hot, part of me wonders if I couldn't just pull it apart, almost like a pulled pork or something. So you just have shreds. Because that seems like that might go a little bit better with the salad, like lots of tiny little shreds rather than a bunch of really big chunks. Okay. All right, we're going to go ahead and pull these out. Generally, I just do these by eyesight. If you like them really crispy, you can add more oil and like leave them in there at a higher temperature. But really, you can't go wrong with this. And again, one of the reasons I like these mats over the pan is the pan's going to be clean and I can just grab the mat itself without burning my hands. Oh, that happens a lot too. And I'm just going to actually just pour these straight in, and then I could just go toss this in the sink, is what I would normally do, and you keep this nice clean pan. So the only thing I have left to add is just the rest of our spinach, as well as I like to leave, maybe only put like half or 60–70% of what I want in this salad, just because sometimes when I get down to make it and I get all the way here and realize, you know what, I don't have a ton of cheese at all, or man, this is a ton of just green stuff. So that's the point where I might want to be like, you know what, I thought I had way too much onion, but now I actually realize I can have more because it's completely covered by a ton of romaine lettuce. Cool. And of course, final thing, it's got to be Caesar dressing. I always leave it to be the very last thing because it's like one of the few things you can't take out, right? So I'm just going to kind of drizzle this on very slightly. I think one thing that's kind of important is, like, generally when I'm not cooking for a show like this, I like to keep track of like just different calorie amounts and whatnot. And one thing that's really important about salad dressing is, one, it's like the primary source of calories in any salad, but all salad dressings are always like, they have the same serving size. So I would actually generally measure this out for myself. It's 2 tablespoons, I believe. So you can just count for various increments. So like if this was like a 2-person salad, I would go for 4 tablespoons. I will call out that I try to like put a fair bit in, stir it, put some more in, stir it. One, that forces me to kind of distribute it more. Then you also don't end up with, say, a giant pool at the very bottom of the salad once it's kind of done. Because I've had that happen where you just go kind of dry. Like it's not a good feeling either way, where you go into one section and it's a pool. And it's not a good sign if you go in and it's just dry salad for half the way through. And then when you have nothing left at the very bottom, that's when all the Caesar comes in. But we're looking pretty good. It's pretty mixed up. So generally, I would then go serve this just as is. But we're actually going to dish this up on this plate over here very carefully. I'm still working on what the best way to get salad out of a bowl is. Like, I have tongs, but they don't quite capture everything as well as I would hope. But I think right now I lean most towards a rubber spatula, so you can kind of get everything out and just make sure the sauce is nice and mixed. And we have our Caesar salad. And again, like, I set out to make a Caesar salad, but the real beauty of this, and the reason I kind of want to highlight it, was everything here is just entirely optional. I've gone as far as to say, like, I'm just going to cut up a head of lettuce because that's what I have, and I need to eat it before it goes bad. But sometimes I have chicken, sometimes I have fish, sometimes I bought way too many tomatoes and I need to make something that can take that and be a dish and use them up. And salad's just like a nice thing that I think isn't readily in people's minds when it comes to stuff like this, that you can use it as such a crazy catch-all dish like you can. And it's a nice thing to kind of keep like back in your head, because so many dishes I'm always worried is like, oh, I can't buy too much of this tomato because it might go bad. I can't buy too much of this spinach because it might go bad. But since I know I can get just one head of lettuce and throw whatever, that is what I found personally really opened up, I guess, my kitchen to start buying either more ingredients or more exotic ingredients. Even stuff like the bread, like, it's a very classic problem to have when I like started with the idea of the show, is bread just goes bad, because honestly I want to have bread around, but it goes bad. And the croutons are just a nice, simple, easy touch where you can be like, hey, I made those homemade, but at the same time you don't have to plan ahead and actually bake bread. You can just toss them in and have a nice, fairly healthy salad. Assume you don't go too hard on the dressing, but sometimes that happens and sometimes that's nice.